katılımcılar, sizlerle birlikte olmak, buraya davet edilmek benim için çok büyük bir onur. Burada olduğum için çok sevinçliyim, çok mutluyum. Umarım böylesi önemli bir yılda küçük balıkçılığın belirtildiği gibi ölçeği küçük, kendisi büyük değer taşıyan balıkçılığa birazcık yardımcı olabilecek bir katkılarda bulunabilirsek çok mutlu olacağım. Heyecanlıyım, o yüzden beni maruz görün. Benim adım Mümtaz. 9 Eylül Üniversitesi Deniz Bilimleri ve Teknolojisi Enstitüsü öğretim üyesiyim. Alanım aslında çalışmış olduğum alan balıkçılık biyoloğuyum, balıkçılık biyolojisi. Yani balık stoklarını değerlendirmek, onların büyüklerini bulmak. Hep biyolojik yanındaydım. Fakat son 10 yıldır, hatta 15 yıl oldu, FAO'da Birleşmiş Milletler Gıda ve Tarım Örgütü'nün ekosistem yaklaşımlı balıkçılık yönetimine büyük ilgi duydum. Ve bu konuda çalışmaya başladım. Aramızda olan bazı arkadaşlarımızla birlikte. Balıkçılığın sorunlarını bir bütün ve de çok karmaşık olduğunu görünce yalnızca biyolojik kısmında değil, aynı zamanda sosyoekonomik yapısında da olmayı ve karar vericilerin doğru yönlendirilmesinde sorumluluk üstlenmeyi uygun gördüm. Burada da umarım bu hizmetleri size verebilirim. Şöyle yapalım diye önerdim. Konuşmacı arkadaşlar da kabul etti. Burada çok değerli konuklarımız var çeşitli ülkelerden. Ben programdaki sıraya göre konuşmacı arkadaşlarımı çağıracağım, davet edeceğim. Onlar konuşmalarını bitirdikten sonra benimle birlikte burada oturacaklar. Daha sonra konuşmalar sırasında siz not alabilirsiniz, sorularınızı belirlersiniz. Sizlere de soru sormanız, anlatmış oldukları konuları daha detaylı, daha belki aklınıza takılabilecek şeyleri açıklayabilecek fırsatı veririz. Böylece daha yararlı bir panel olur diye düşünüyorum. Teşekkür ediyorum. Yerime geçmeden önce FAO'dan yani Birleşmiş Milletler Gıda ve Tarım Örgütü'nden Haydar Fersoy kardeşimizi çağırıyorum buraya. Kendisinin sunu yapması için. Buyur Haydar. Teşekkürler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The participants, I have honor to address at this event on the occasion of the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. I will try to provide with you the key objective of this international year and also some outlines of the global action plan which has been developed in relation to this year. The previous speakers, I believe, made an excellent overview of the value of the small-scale fisheries. So I extend my thanks to the previous speakers. With your permission, I would like to start my presentation with FAO video on the International Year. Ses. My name is Haydar Fersoy. I'm the Senior Fishery and Aquaculture Officer working with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. My responsibility area covers both Europe and also the Central Asia. Yeah, please. And now I would like to provide you some big picture of the current status of the fisheries and aquaculture worldwide. İkinciye geçmeniz önce. As seen on the screen, on global level, we are experiencing an important increase in the fishery production. I should say that since the 1980s, we witnessed about 80-20% increase in total fish production at global level. Together with this fishery production, we are also observing an increase and considerable increase in fish consumption. The fish consumption per head is around 20 kg nowadays, and we are expecting that this trend will also increase in coming years. In accordance to the latest figures of FAO, in 2019, we had a production of the 90.5 million tons from capture fisheries, while the contribution from the aquaculture was 85.5 million. In terms of percentage, the contribution of the marine capture in this total was 52%. So the other part is mostly from aquaculture. And more importantly, of this total, 40% of the production comes from small-scale fisheries. In terms of employment, we observe that almost 90% of all employees are involved in small-scale fisheries. I would say that both small-scale fisheries and aquaculture provides food, income, and livelihoods to a great number of people worldwide. An estimated 480 million people are benefited from the fishery and aquaculture value chain. Within this total, women is represented almost 14%. And there was some criticism about the status of the marine fish stocks. Unfortunately, over the last decades, the rate of the fish stock which are being caught within biologically sustainable limits are decreasing. Today, almost 1/3 of the fish stocks are being used within biological limits. In other words, we will say that there is overfishing for 1/3 of the fish stocks. Unfortunately, the status is much worse when it comes to Mediterranean and the Black Sea. These are some projections. In the coming 10 years, we believe that fish production will continue to increase, consumption in the same pattern, and also we will, for sure, I should say that currently fish and fishery products are the most traded food items in the world, and this trend will increase. I mean, yeah, it's very unique food item. Almost 38% of the fish caught is being internationally traded all over the more than 200 countries. And according to estimation, in the coming 10 years, we will observe a 25 price increase in fish and fishery products. I mean, some of the speakers were touching the difference between the commercial and small-scale fisheries, and also the difference between the small-scale fisheries and also artisanal. I would say that at FO level, we don't discriminate these two terms. Artisanal and small-scale fishes, in most cases, are used interchangeably, and we don't see any point in discussing determining the line, these two important sector of the fisheries. As it was stated, I mean, there are several characteristics which are general. This sort of fishery use relatively small production unit with relatively low input and low output. And these activities, in most cases, are limited to low level of technology and also small capital investment. This fisheries generally is managed at family level, and the fish harvested in most cases are sold at local level, but as I said, there is a huge international traffic. Also, there is a possibility for such small-scale fisheries that the harvested fish would go enter the international traffic of fish and fish products. I mean, many times it was stated that, okay, the sector is although small in scale, but has a big value. And over the last years, and most of the representatives of this sector claim that both at national, regional, and also international levels, the consideration is not given to the sector, and nobody is listening to the representatives of the sector. And again, these people argue that most of the attention so far has been paid to the existing conflict over the commercial fisheries and small-scale fishes in terms of the use of the natural resources. But I am glad to inform the meeting that over the last years there has been some change in terms of acknowledgement of the role of small-scale fishers, and also an increasing understanding of this sector. The milestone at international level was development of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, which were in detail mentioned by Dr. Krause. As is stated, these guidelines are based on 13 criteria. It is a result of a big consultation among about 10,000 representatives of the small-scale sector. It provides, I believe, a good framework, management framework, and also the policy framework for the management of this sector. Most importantly, as again stated by Dr. Kaiser, these guidelines are right-based, they consider the gender equality and also human rights based. And so I should say that over the last years, we are observing social dialogue, increasing social dialogue between the small-scale fisheries, aquaculture, and also with the other key stakeholders, including policymakers. This is a story, and in 2016, under FAO, we have FAO Committee on Fisheries. This is the highest international platform where global fisheries and aquaculture problems are discussed and solutions are set by the member countries. And in 2016, the committee agreed that we have an international year dedicated to small-scale fisheries. Originally, this proposal came from the Latin America group of the committee, and then unanimously accepted by the committee. And then finally in 2018, the UN Assembly declared the year as an international year, with a role to FAO to lead this process in partnership with the other key stakeholders. We have two key objectives this year. The first one is related to enhanced global public awareness on the importance of the small-scale fisheries and aquaculture, and also through this we believe that the public try to understand this sector, and also through this use we would like to contribute also the food safety, a better management of natural resources, and and the second key objective is to promote a partnership among the key stakeholders. And how we govern this international year. First, under the structure, the global structure, we have an international steering committee, which is headed by the Peru with the help of the other countries. And under FAO, we have a secretariat, the key role of which is to coordinate all the activities being conducted at global level. And also this secretariat is responsible to report and collect all the information about the event that has been conducted this year. And at the end of year, FAO, my organization, will disseminate all the list of activities with the key outcomes to the all-related organization and also the member state. I should say that, this year is not limited to 2020. Through this year, we would like to gain a momentum to understand the small-scale fisheries, to promote small-scale fisheries in aquaculture. So we believe that, we hope that, the momentum gained this year also would continue in coming years. And also, besides this two structuring, we have some regional committees. Currently, we have 3 ones in Central Asia, but any region has the right to establish any committee. I should say that in Europe, Spain is the leading country responsible for this year. Okay, the last 5 minutes, some information about the list, and also in the steering committee we have some non-governmental organizations as seen on the screen. And for this year we have a global action plan, and the aim of this global action plan is to accelerate the support required to bring small-scale artisanal fisheries and aquaculture to the forefront of social attention. This global action plan provides guidance for the international committee, including local and national government bodies of the UN and the other key stakeholders. And also this plan aims to support the implementation of the current normative instruments, such as the small-scale fisheries guidelines, as mentioned by Dr. Kaiser. At global level, we have many high-ranking targets. These are the most related targets to fisheries. So what we expect is from this year, first, we would like to have a raised awareness, sharing accessible information and key messages on small-scale artisanal fisheries and aquaculture with a broad range of audience, including through the organization and participation in relevant global, regional, and national events. So this event is also a good example of such raised awareness. And also through this year, we would like to strengthen the science and policy interface, as it was mentioned at global, at a the modern fishery management regimes are based on the technical science-based advice. Unfortunately, in most cases, the policymakers are not considering all this advice, but through this year again, we would like to promote this interface between the fish workers and also the scientists. And the third expected outcome is empowered stakeholders. Through this outcome, we would like to enable small-scale artisanal fishers, fish farmers, and fish workers and their organizations to engage as equal partners in their relevant decision-making. I mean, there has been many claims by the sector that the sector is not represented duly at the management level. So I believe that this outcome is of importance in this regard. And the last outcome is an increased partnership among the key stakeholders. So through this outcome, we would like to build a new and strengthen existing partnership and also both among the small-scale actors, organization, as well as the other partners from the government and the other bodies. These are key pillars of the international, the global action plan. Unfortunately, I have no time to give some detailed information on that, but just I could list, I believe. The first one is environmental sustainability. Through this year, we also would like to contribute an environmentally sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and of course, to provide a sustainable economic sector, and also considering social sustainability. Governance is key in terms of the management of the sector. Gender equity is a cross-cutting issue which we consider all the time during the management, both at national and local levels. Of course, this fisheries and aquaculture has been one of the main contributors of the food sector, so more efforts should be allocated in this regard. And most important, I believe, the resilience. Unfortunately, we know that the sector is facing many challenges So we need a resilient sector against the challenges which may include, for example, climate change and destruction of the ecosystems and habitats. I mentioned this. As I said, there are different levels of we work. And the first one is at the global level. Okay, there are some UN-related commitments. All countries are contributing to the international decade of family farming. Also, we have some commitments, international commitments in relation to action on nutrition and also science-related activities. This is the level, international level. Of course, we have many fisheries instruments which try to provide a framework for sustainable fisheries, and so through this also we would like to contribute the implementation of this international framework, management framework set by such international instruments, and also we would like to create a synergy with other international organizations like World Trade Organization, Committee on World Food and Security. And the last one, okay, the last words, okay, I believe that everybody can play a role in this year. This will be simple. Of course, there are some key roles to governments which are with consumers. For example, consumers are expected to know more the fisheries, the fishers, the sector, and governments are expected to develop new or enabling condition for the implementation of effective fishery management frameworks. And I think we have to work a lot on the climate change. For me, it's one of the biggest challenges that we will have. The effect of the climate change and aquaculture are not clear, but there are many good signs and evidence that, climate change is impacting very seriously the fishery sector, and some roles for academia. Academia also is expected to provide a technical capacity needed for the resilient fisheries and aquaculture sector, and also some roles for NGOs and development partners. This is how we can get involved in such events of this international year.
I'm sorry, but
yeah, okay.
Here. Thank you very much. It's very interesting, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I apologize for this. Okay, thank you.
Haydar kardeşimize çok teşekkür ediyorum çok ilginç konuşması için. Ama zaten soru soracak zamanımız olacak. O daha da ayrıntılı bilgiler verebilir yılla ilgili olarak ve Birleşmiş Milletler Gıda Örgütü'nün çalışması ilgili. Şimdi izninizle I would like to invite Dr. Mimi Lam from Canada. She's gonna be with us, and I will ask her to introduce herself first. And I leave the floor to you with pleasure.
So thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to participate in this meeting, and thank you all for attending. So as my slides come up, yep. I'm from Canada, but I'm actually working at the University of Bergen with Professor Kaiser. We're in the same center, the Center for Vetenskap Theory. And so as you'll see in my presentation, my work is very much at the science policy interface, and it is transdisciplinary in its focus and scope. What more would you like to know about me as we're waiting for the slides to come up? I'm trained as a theoretical chemist, and I went to the University of Bergen on a Marie Curie Fellowship, which is a mobility grant funded by the European Commission to promote, transfer of knowledge, and I came as mainly someone working in fisheries, and Matthias, as you have seen, is a professor of philosophy and has worked very much in applied ethics. And so in the course of the 4.5 years that I've been at the University of Bergen, I've been learning more about philosophy and ethics, and that's what I'll present to you today in the context of seafood, and particularly with a focus on fisheries and some aquaculture. And hopefully my slides are coming up soon. Thankfully, my slides are coming up, or I thought I'd have to tell you my whole life story. Let's see, I was born in Flin Flon, Manitoba in Canada. It's a very small mining town, 10,000 people. And it was known recently for these old copper mining places where, as you may know, in Canada, marijuana was legalized, so Flin Flon became notorious for a place where they started growing marijuana in these old copper mines. Another interesting fact, Canada is very much, ice hockey is a big pastime, and so Flin Flon is also home to Bobby Clark, who played for the Philadelphia Flyers. Norway is the most responsible fishing nation, and that's partly why I also went to Norway to do research in seafood ethics. What else?
All right. Okay, Mimi, we got your presentation now.
Great. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Ethical or Value-Based Approach to Fisheries Sustainability. And the image on the front is from my research project, currently funded by the Research Council of Norway, Managing Ethical Norwegian Seascape Activities, or MENSA for short. So, as I mentioned, prior to joining the University of Bergen, I was working at the University of British Columbia in the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, which is widely regarded as the top research center of fisheries, and it's dominated by natural scientists, mainly biologists and ecologists, who focus on the dynamics of fish populations. And my research has been very much focused on the more human side, or on the human side of fisheries, and to try to reframe the problem of global fisheries, because often you hear that global fish stocks are overfished and largely depleted in many fishing nations. And so my approach has been very much to try to reframe this fisheries problem as an ethical problem, and that recognizing that fisheries sustainability is an ethical dilemma involving value trade-offs. So given the topic of this symposium, small in size, big in value, something like that, I wanted to contrast these two perspectives of fisheries looking at scales and values in fisheries. And so to start with, this is more the traditional approach to dividing different fisheries, is based on, as you've seen, artisanal fisheries and industrial fisheries. And so the vessels, which is hence the distinction between small and large scale, is the vessels tend to be small for artisanal fisheries and large for industrial. And distinctions are often made in terms of the vessel engine power. And so for, again, small-scale fisheries, they're either non-motorized or motorized. And motorized, though, with small engines, less than 50 kilowatts. So the industrial, then, are often identified as ones with greater than 50 kilowatts. But this is a variable definition. This is one I just pulled from a paper by Rousseau et al. From Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2019. But if you look at the literature, there is no clear-cut distinction between what constitutes a small-scale or a large-scale fisheries, because it's very context-dependent. It depends a lot on the way the fisheries are managed within countries, or what your focus is on. It could be looking at subsidies of small-scale and large-scale fisheries, or the sustainability, and it's really a fuzzy distinction. But as you've seen in the previous talk, there are some sort of general characteristics that include the way these fisheries are operated, and so often it's owner or family operated in the small scale and with salaried crews in large scale. The location is often with these smaller vessels that they fish mostly inshore, and for the larger vessels offshore and in the deep seas. And finally, with respect to gear types, they tend to be more selective for small scale with multiple gear technologies, and in the large scale, non-selective with non-selective gears that are specialized for the target species. Now, these are just general characteristics, and so this is not, I want to emphasize that there is no really good, clear distinction between small scale and large scale fisheries. Hence, I'm proposing that we look instead at the values in fisheries, and maybe that might be a better way to categorize fisheries, to distinguish the different values that are manifest in these different types of fisheries. And so we got a really good introduction to values and ethics from Professor Kaiser's talk, but I wanted to build on what he presented, because we are close collaborators, and I think we present complementary perspectives. So I show just a basic introduction to values as reference points for evaluating something as positive or negative. And this image I took in Vienna, which I thought was really sweet, with traffic lights with a couple holding hands to cross the street. And so that probably tells you more about my character, as you learned at the beginning. I think you know more about me than most people already. And values also generally are ones that orient our behavior, motivate our action, and importantly, in the context of fisheries that's often missed, is that they include both rational and emotional dimensions. And so when economists, for example, look at fisheries, or natural scientists, they tend to focus on only the rational aspects, that we're rational actors and that we focus, say, on money, but we all know in our lives and in fisheries that the emotional dimension can trump the rational. And that's something that I want to try to make manifest in the research I'm doing, focusing on values in fisheries. So why focus on values in fisheries? I've already alluded to that. But it can facilitate stakeholder buy-in, legitimize decision-making, engage broader society, resolve policy trade-offs and conflicts, which is really important, I think, because fisheries are very much conflicted today, and enhance fisheries sustainability. And as Matthias mentioned, that fisheries problems are very much wicked policy problems because they're human problems. And again, my basic argument is that the approaches to fisheries problems in the have been rather limited by focusing on the methods and tools of the natural sciences, and that we need to bring in more the social sciences and the humanities, that is a transdisciplinary perspective, to try to solve these wicked or post-normal science problems. And I think this is well recognized and easy to say, but very difficult to implement. And that is the challenge that I'm trying to tackle in my research, and you can tell me if you think it's useful. But again, focusing on fisheries values, the important thing is to recognize that there are inherent trade-offs whenever we make decisions where values can conflict, and they often do, in fisheries and in our personal lives, that we need to make choices. It's easy to make choices when there's a clear something that's really important to us, like if I'm hungry, then I will do nothing but try to find a place that I can go eat. But if I need to prepare a presentation, then I need to decide, okay, what's more important? And so in fisheries, there's, again, often conflicting values, or just to recognize that there are diverse values and hence diverse fisheries. And these are just some of the values that are present in fisheries, both large and small scale, is that they're an important source of food and nutrition, of livelihoods, income, culture, and a part of the ecology, the fish resources. So how do we make decisions on how to manage fishery resources that contribute to all of these diverse values to diverse people? So traditionally, as I mentioned, fisheries are dichotomized in terms of their scale, large and small scale. So what I present here, it's a well-known slide from my colleague at the University of British Columbia, Daniel Pauly, who's probably one of the, well, he is one of the top fishery scientists. And he and his colleague Dirk Zeller put this together, contrasting large and small scale fisheries. And what you see is, schematically it shows, if I don't think I can get it, so. Anyway, it compares the two different types of fisheries against different fisheries benefits, including human consumption, fuel use, number of fishers employed, subsidies. And actually, I was thinking when I was preparing this talk that these fishery benefits that are being compared across the two different scales of fisheries are really different values. And so this is the beginning, perhaps, of a different way of looking at these different fisheries, is to recognize that they contribute to food security, discards in terms of the impact on the ecology. Feed is maybe can be looked at as equity. Similarly, subsidies is another important component of how the resources are distributed. So what I did was take those values that are, like the image in the previous slide, it's a schematic, but it's actually based on quantitative data. And so what I did then is to just do a rapid assessment of scoring using traffic light coding to indicate, with green being good and red being bad, and the oranges being kind of in between, that very quickly, on a very gross level, that you see that small-scale fisheries at, globally are better. Now that's a normative statement, and that should be qualified because all small-scale fisheries are different. But just on the global aggregated level, we can see very quickly that the small and large-scale fisheries have different values and different impacts on the environment and on people. And so this might be a nice way of trying to look at the different aspects of these various fisheries. That's new. And this is something I would like to pursue because I think it's a nice way of trying to capture what has been a very fuzzy kind of characterization of fisheries. And I think, you know, I mean, even in the name, large and small scale, it's usually size matters, right? And big is better. So large scale, small scale, there's an implication that the small scale is somehow not as good, not as big. But if instead we focus on values, then there's the diversity of values of these different fisheries, and that might be an equalizer in terms of how these fisheries are demarcated. And so that takes me to my research that's focused on a more ethical approach to sustainability, is really to try to make these typically implicit values explicit, and taking ethics as the starting point, which is a holistic approach to try to look at these diverse values and make some sense of them, how to weigh the different values and to rationally make decisions that recognize that there are inherent trade-offs across these diverse values. And so this is research from my Marie Curie Fellowship, where I looked at seafood ethics with Professor Kaiser. And we developed this definition of seafood ethics together, that it's a descriptive and evaluative study and normative reflection of values, value-based trade-offs, and ethical dilemmas of stakeholders and citizens across diverse seafood value chains. And so what you see in this is that seafood ethics is a transdisciplinary field of scholarship that is new, and it might be a good perspective or framework to look at marine resource sustainability and how seafood policy and governments can be influenced by a better recognition of the diversity of values at play, and that can be at conflict and need to be traded off in decision making. And you've already seen an image of seafood value chains from Matthias, but what I wanted to emphasize is that there's a diversity of values at play between the different stakeholders in the value chains that go from producers, processors, distributors that are all interacting to wholesalers, retailers, and consumers that are making decisions based on their values. And each of these actors within the highly interacting and connected seafood value chain, they're all different with different values. And even ourselves, we have values that are more important at different times in our lives. And so this is a highly complex situation that is often ignored, say, by economic analyses, because they tend to assume that we're all rational actors in our decision making and identical. So what we want to do is to try to understand the diversity of humans and the different values that exist in their decision making. So one approach that I've developed is adapting this ethical matrix approach that Ben Meffam at the University of Nottingham originally developed for genetically modified foods. And I've extended it to look at developing an ethical matrix for seafood production systems with the goal to facilitate rational decision making when there are different actors with different values. And including also the human and natural environment interactions. And so what I've done is you've seen this previously already from Matthias, but I've extended it to include different actors within the human system that are, in addition to, actually I should have fishers and aquaculturalists, but consumers, citizens, future generations, and this can be expanded to include as many actors as are have relevant interests in the production system and value chain of focus. And so just to quickly overview different potential indicators that can be used to look at well-being. They tend to focus on security, food security of consumers, or the work and social security of the workers, ecosystem integrity, fish welfare. And then autonomy is very much about freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of behavior, freedom to compete or use or access resources. And justice, it depends, but often it's about equitable access to resources or food, mitigation of harms. And then the final sort of in the bottom line is sort of the overall looking at the integrated human and environment interaction or system. Across that system is sustainable development is an overall goal. From a well-being, I guess, perspective, autonomy is to have resilient communities, both human and fish. And the justice is, I cast that in terms of ethical governance, which is the focus of my research. And so just a very rapid, again, rapid assessment of using that matrix and then color coding based on qualitative assessment of information on small-scale and large-scale fisheries, where, again, good is color-coded green, average is yellow in this case, and poor is red. You can see that small-scale fisheries come out better. And again, this is just a gross kind of proof of concept of this methodology that it's done for small-scale and large-scale fisheries at the global level. But ideally, one would apply it to specific fisheries and then show the contrasts that you observe either across large and small-scale fisheries or within different small-scale fisheries or large-scale fisheries. So I think this is a potentially quite a robust method that needs further development with quantitative indicators, but so far I've just used a qualitative assessment. And the same can be done for aquaculture, because small-scale and large-scale aquaculture facilities exist, and also different species. They can be carnivorous species that rely on fish for feed, which have a much higher impact than farmed omnivorous species. And so finally, I wanted to just conclude with presenting you with work that I'm doing presently. I mentioned at the beginning the logo is for a research project that's been funded by the Research Council of Norway, looking at Norwegian seascape activities, and it's trying to develop an integrated ethical approach to the sustainable management of Norwegian seascape activities, again using, focusing on values and valuation of Norwegian stakeholders and citizens, and providing methodological tools to evaluate the trade-offs when making marine resource management decisions. And as I said, to focus, the reason of focusing on values is to try to make the trade-offs explicit in decision-making. And so to focus on values and the different sources of knowledge that are possessed by stakeholders and citizens, then this ethical governance approach is trying to bring those together, as I showed you in some of these tables, that makes these different value judgments and facts that are available explicit. And Mensa, and this is advancing on its own, but Mensa is a proof of concept model, hopefully, at the national level of how to reconcile these inherent policy trade-offs at the UN Sustainable Development Goals level. And finally, Teshika Adiram.
Thank you, Mimi, for a wonderful presentation. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed it very much. I would like to invite the next speaker now. She's from Germany, Dr. Gesche Krause. Maybe you should take your translation device as well, because when they ask questions, I will, of course, try to translate, but it might be useful to have it, and I will fix that. You'll get yours. Okay. And also, technically, if you can show me your presentation, then you will not struggle. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, dear distinguished members of the governing municipalities, dear ladies and sirs. I first of all would like to thank the organizers, Shama and Yasmin, for having the opportunity to be here with you today. I have a little small present for you. It's a local chocolate from Bremen, and it has the town musicians on it. So the Bremen town musicians is a famous story, well, at least famously for Bremen, where four rather useless creatures come together and make music. And because they're joining forces, they share something bigger than they are, and they are able to chase away the robbers who are the bad guys. So with that, I think it's very nice that we are all now together and are able to share. So Chama, may I give you that? And I hope I don't have to tell my life story. I have no idea. I have no idea which one it is. Maybe
This one, MPC, no.
yeah, I don't know.
No.
No. I have my stick out. Got all translated into Turkish, and I'm not too familiar with. Maybe we do it this way. Okay, thank you. So, my name is Gesche Krause. I'm from Germany, from the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Marine Research in Bremerhaven. And so my background is more on social sciences. And but the Alfred Wegener Institute is a very large natural science dominated place. So a lot of my work deals with how do natural science find their way into policy making, and how can we measure the impact, so what is good and how could we do that? And as a hobby, basically, as a sideline, I'm very much interested in socioeconomics, and especially socioeconomics of aquaculture. And I need this one. Yeah. So here today, I have the pleasure now to dwell into more deep into the socioeconomic aspects of aquaculture, and I draw from a lot of this work I do for the ICES, which is the International Council for the Commission for the Exploration of the Seas, which is an international intergovernmental body putting forward recommendations to the EU, to Canada, to Iceland, Norway, etc. So here we go. Why do we actually talk about small-scale fisheries? Well, it has all to do with food and food security. And if we talk about food security, it's not only one dimension we're looking at, but we're looking at very different aspects therein. So food is also about how we're using it. Do we have access to it? So access meaning also can we afford it, buy it? And if it's available. And under this umbrella, we have this triple burden of overnutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, or undernutrition. So when we talk about food security, we definitely need to be aware of this multi-food, what it actually entails. So, and then we come to the problem, okay, how can we address that? So there's a hidden dilemma, I would say, because we obviously need more than one discipline to cover this problem. So, as I said before, I had to think a lot about these matters, working as a social scientist, so as a minority in a big group of natural scientists. So what I found out, or I observed, and I think some of you will see this, recognized it, but from a natural science perspective, so from a positivism approach, nature is something very interesting, highly dynamic, and so forth, and the social system somewhat stable. Well, we are all part of this. In contrast, from a social science point of view, I would say, well, the world is a social construct, so it's very interesting and highly dynamic, and nature is, well, it's there. So obviously, we have there a problem, and it pertains to languages, paradigms, and methods. So because the way we talk to each other, we may or may not understand each other. And so the problem is simply that we have a donkey's dilemma here. We're all sort of part of the same system, and we need to somewhat to negotiate between these two very opposing views and methods. So it's just sort of showing that both haystacks are interesting. At the end of the day, if we want to achieve something and go forward, we have to agree on what haystack to use first. So having that under the umbrella, we then tried to do an interdisciplinary engagement in aquaculture. And here, again, we can see that's quite a prominent figure, that aquaculture can be viewed as a transformative marine resource use. So here on the left side here, that's sort of the greenish is sort of the time we as human beings manage to cultivate terrestrial plants and animals. And here you see on the other side, quite more into before present, 100 years from here, we just started with cultivating aquatic species and plants. So from a natural science point of view, there's quite a different interpretation than from a social science point of view. So from a natural science point of view, yes, we were very successful from the terrestrial side, and we took a little bit longer to finally get the last curve. And from the fishery side or from the marine side, it took a long time, and then we rocketed off because of science evidence. From a social science point of view, I would say then, well, this lag here sort of indicates that we're still in the learning process of how actually to deal with this. We're sort of already very much used to the terrestrial cultivation. We don't question that, but we're still struggling to find meanings and values when it comes to marine systems. So then the question is, what emerges between this interaction between food, people, and how we make meaning out of it? So obviously, as already Mimi said before, we have different stakes in aquaculture. So here is an example of shellfish aquaculture in India, and then very much opposing highly technical offshore shellfish cultivation off the coast of Belgium. So obviously, likewise with fisheries, it's also in aquaculture that we have different contextual settings, and then obviously the question arises, what is sustainable? So the question of sustainability is something which we tackle quite a lot. And here in the ICES group, we had actually discussed it. How can we actually capture that, the social and economic dimensions, and then how to merge them in a meaningful way that we really understand what's going on, and how to get context across different scales. So the approaches and methods we used, I do this very quickly. It's basically what that we said we're using a systems approach, and we had we studied the literature, etc., and we did a lot of semi-structured interviews, and we came up then with some sort of matrix. And the matrix then helped us to understand what are the social and economic dimensions. So this matrix here, just to very briefly show you, well, we call it infamously in our group the onion, because it looks a little bit aquaculture in the middle. The number 2 is, that's something which most of our research is always focused on, directly on aquaculture. However, aquaculture is not happening in an empty space, but it's always somewhat guided by the framing conditions. And the framing conditions are not only the ecological ones, but also economic, socio-economic ones, like that we actually need to know what we're doing, and also are there institutional policies in place. And all that influences on different levels, and then we can develop indicators and get some governance going. So picking up the request not only to show the problem, but also to show some solutions. So I would like to show you 2 examples how this works, to give you an idea that working from the premise that small scale is more sustainable. Let's have a look of how can we actually get some social indicators visualized so that we actually can see that. So this is just an example. No worries, I'm not going to go through it in detail. But what we did was, on UN level, we have certain indicators and variables, which sort of relate, for example, to demographic change, community structure. And then we asked for aquaculture, like if we actually want to develop it, is there sufficient human capital there that we actually can do this? And then so we asked them, does it have any effect on the overall demographic structure of an area? And then we asked on regional, local, regional, national level. And we also developed some metrics so that we could actually sort of prove the concept. So quickly to show you some results from that. So this is now rope mussel, sort of shellfish, small, across different countries we looked on. And in dark blue is the local level effects of the social indicators, or the local level social effects of aquaculture. And so you see, by and large, there is quite a strong leaning towards population, P is population. And so here in Ireland and in Canada, and in Maine there was more leaning towards education, and in Scotland it was more also on health and housing. And the orange is regional and the greyish is national. So obviously there is a signal, a social importance signal on the local level, but not so much on the national level. Now have a look now to finfish cultivation. So here, for example, salmon. Here we see that the local level benefits quite strongly if you have finfish cultivation in the area. And in all of these, there's quite a noteworthy trend towards that population is quite an important indicator or factor therein. So contrasting these two, we see that different types of aquaculture have different types of signals from a social point of view. So the central finding, what we found, was that aquaculture is not only economic and technical interesting, but it really helps communities sort of to maintain the working waterfront in an area, so that we say we want to transform our societies, we need to have that in mind. And that interestingly enough, that the social influence of shellfish or mussel cultivation is maybe not that much in a sense of the classical social indicators. However, well, yes, and it may indicate that you have to have a minimum size so that you can actually have a social signal. And in finfish, we were quite surprised about how much strong influence, effect, positive effect it has on social well-being on the local level, because we always say, well, finfish is not really the major thing. However, I want to stress here that the social impact is not that much not proportional somehow to the economic ones. And the social value of safeguarding traditional rural communities may have a very high cultural heritage value. So as the speakers already before me indicated, that it's quite massive. So obviously, if we talk about sustainable aquaculture, it has not only to do with more food logic. So the next one, very quickly, because I'm running out of time, is about economic data and its usefulness. So can we actually, when we derive economic data, can we actually then say this is a good enterprise and this is a bad enterprise, and are we collecting the right data? So here is, and I'm not going through this, but just to show you that we assessed from the statistics available per country, so this is up there on the national level, Europe as a total, and then Norway, Scotland, France, etc. We then looked on the different information available on the different levels, so the national, regional, and local level, and then the different types of economic data you would have to have, so direct effects and multiplier effects of aquaculture, non-aquaculture market effects, and externalities. And I think which is very clear from the onset that on the national level, we can collect some data on aquaculture, but we do very poorly on local level. And especially now, if you think of my previous example with the social indicators, which are very strong on the local level, this obviously needs to be worked on. And so here, again, we also looked then what would be actually useful to have. So obviously, the decision levels, most of the time, like permits, area planning, it all happens local and regional. And interestingly enough, we don't have data for that. So obviously we need to, that would be one part of the problem solving. We need to have more data on these levels where actually decisions are made and the effects are felt. So just very quickly then, The problem then, the future studies, is then what types of economic data could we actually use, and how useful is it? So, and there, I hope with this example I could show a little bit that aquaculture is more than just a simple accounting logic. It also has so many effects that we need to consider. So to wrap up, so what are marriages between, if we have an inclusive interdisciplinary engagements? So obviously something new happens, because we then can actually end up developing jointly transformative visions and pathways how to actually move, in this case, sustainable aquaculture into the future. And maybe also to overcome this either-or logic. For example, like what we heard already, the small scale versus the large scale, but maybe sort of how could we actually marry these two branches in a more sustainable way. And to that end, while we're discussing and developing these futures, obviously something what we should not forget is the sustainable equity or social equity dimension. And I think here it is really important that we need to recognize that every one of us wants to create something and wants to share and develop some meaning. So we are not only humans in the sense that we want to have food and drink, but we also crave for some recognition, like, yes, you're doing the right choice of food every day. So it's a bit about worthiness, dignity, and equity. And with that, I'd like to close and would like to stress that we definitely need to develop, all of us together, compelling new transformative narratives for the future, recognizing that culture always eats strategy for breakfast. Thank you. Teşekkür ederim.
I will give the last presentation for this session, and I'll try to be concise since we all also need food, and quite soon, I think. First, I want to really thank for the organizers, Target Association, and participants for this event, and I think it has provided some really interesting and enriching insights. And just as the last presenter called for more attention to social equity issues, I am going to continue precisely on that and talk about justice and how environmental and ecological justice relate to small-scale fisheries. My own background, I come from the University of Jyväskylä, Finland, and my research interests relate to food justice, environmental justice, and just transition towards sustainable food systems. So my background is both in philosophy and in social sciences and food system studies, which creates kind of really challenging but interesting combination for myself to try to figure out how to put justice into practice, understanding the real world challenges and realities, rather than describing ideal states that cannot be achieved. But before I proceed to my contents, I also want to bring greetings from the European Society for Agricultural and Food Ethics, EURSAFE. I'm representing the organization here today, and for those who don't know yet, EURSAFE was established in 1999, and it is an independent association providing a focal point for any people with professional interest in agricultural and food ethics related matters. And EURSAFE is an interdisciplinary, cross-cultural and non-partisan organization. It aims to encourage academic education and research and international debate on ethical issues around food system activities, just like here today. And we at YourSafe really value collaboration with the Target Association and Turkish research colleagues. So on behalf of YourSafe, also my gratitude for the opportunity to be here today. And for anyone interested, there is actually still time to register for the YourSafe annual conference that will be held in Edinburgh in September. So if you're interested, please Google the YourSafe website and conference and you will find detailed information. But then to the actual topic of today. So we have heard about different aspects that we can take to values, sustainability, and lots of different viewpoints. It's already quite rich and complex. So why is actually justice important here? First of all, justice as generally meaning the idea of equality. It's somehow fundamental idea that describes the humanity and what we have achieved together. I would say that at the heart of the idea of, for example, sustainable development goals is also the idea of justice and that all humans are equal in their dignity. So justice is a really noble idea and something that we all find valuable and tend to find important. And this is one reason why justice is actually a good platform to try to address complex value-related questions and trade-offs. Justice generally is something we agree about. Justice is important. But, of course, it can mean very different things. And there we need ethics and philosophy to help make sense of justice and different claims for justice, so that the discussion can then continue and justice can be put into practice. Today I will focus on environmental justice, which is concerns those issues of justice that relate to environmental goods or harms and the distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. So it's easy to see that food production, including small-scale fisheries activities, is a very important question for environmental justice. So to clarify what justice as equality is about, we have two very important questions that philosophers have been asking over decades. If justice is about equality, question number one, the equality of what? And if justice is about equality, question number two, equality between whom? And these are the questions I will today answer from the viewpoint of small-scale fisheries and related agents, and based on my own research on environmental, ecological, and food justice. So, to start with the first question, equality of what? In environmental justice, there is a three-dimensional framework that is used to characterize the different important contents of justice, and it is also useful for illustrating different issues related to small-scale fishery activities. So these dimensions of environmental justice first begin with distributive justice. It is something that easily comes to mind when we think about justice. It's the distribution of benefits, burdens, also in a way distribution of value and disvalue. And when we think about small-scale fisheries, the particularly important issues here are, first of all, of course, food security. It's the ultimate point of food system activities to produce food security for human beings. And any kind of food system that undermines food security is unjust. Also, this is related to livelihoods, and in the context of small-scale fisheries, very importantly so. From the viewpoint of justice, food system should provide decent livelihoods and income for those who are working in food system activities, also in agricultural production and fisheries. Therefore, justice, it can be said, to require that the livelihoods of those actors who produce food for us and who produce food security in sustainable ways must be supported to ensure that because of injustices, we don't end up in a situation where food is only produced by huge companies that don't take care of sustainability requirements or other justice impacts. Third, and related to the previous ones, the distribution of environmental benefits and burdens is very central in environmental and food justice. And this also is linked to sustainability very closely. So if, for example, environmental benefits that sustainable fishing practices can produce to local communities, if they produce such benefits, it would be fair that small-scale fisheries are paid or compensated for those benefits. And on the other hand, the most unjust situation would be where the profits and economic benefits of fishing practices go to huge companies and the burdens, environmental harms and pollution stay in local communities. So it's important to take care that both benefits and burdens are distributed fairly. Another aspect is recognition or sociocultural justice. And sociocultural justice has been also discussed today, so with different words. Sociocultural justice includes respectful partnerships, so that, for example, small-scale fisheries are not remaining powerless, invisible actors who need to accept any conditions in markets to get their products sold. Recognition also includes the recognition of the values and the contribution of small-scale fisheries. Here we talk about food security, local benefits, cultural and identity contributions. So justice highlights making visible of the non-economic values that small-scale fisheries can produce. And when we manage to highlight these non-economic values, small-scale fisheries have much better prospects to succeed and continue in the future if it's not only the price and volume that we see. And finally, it also requires us to see the context-specific vulnerabilities, strengths and knowledges that these fishing communities have, so that when we think about, for example, sustainability demands, we look at the local circumstances and here also the local perceptions. And this also relates to procedural justice, the last dimension of environmental justice. It means justice in the decision-making processes, and it includes asking who are actually included in decision-making, who are heard, and are local communities and local people involved. Procedural justice also requires granting access to relevant information. For example, when we think about sustainability actions, information needs to be available to everyone. If information is hard to get, or you need to create and collect information by yourself, or if it's expensive to get the information, it's not in the reach of small-scale actors, but only in the hands of big corporations who can benefit from that information in unequal ways. And finally, procedural justice must meet the challenge of integrating scientific knowledge and local perceptions so that we take these value diversities already mentioned today many times, we take them into account and combine that with the scientific knowledge and understanding we have, for example, regarding what are the sustainability-related requirements. And finally, in my own research, one aspect that has been highlighted increasingly and that is not so well visible in these three dimensions concerns capacity building and equal opportunities. Because injustices in fishing and fishery activities often relate to the fact that small-scale actors are much less resourced to understand, prepare, invest in, adapt to, and communicate and negotiate any kind of activities. And this lesser resources problem is not only about economic resources, but also about, for example, knowledge access and social networks and influencing power that big corporations have in greater amounts. So thus, it's an important cross-cutting principle across these other dimensions. To sum up what this, in a way, this is the middle way sum up. What this shows is that sustainable small-scale fishing can promote environmental and ecological justice. Actually, I'm happy that this point was really well demonstrated in earlier presentations already by, for example, Mimi's evaluative matrix. So I don't need to go into details here now. But acknowledging this value and kind of contributive value to justice is important motivation to support small-scale fisheries. Then the second question, big question of environmental and ecological justice. Equality among whom? The basic idea of justice is familiar to all of us, that all people have equal dignity. What environmental justice brings to this basic idea is that we must also think about the future generations, and therefore the sustainability, environmental sustainability of our actions is of crucial importance. And what ecological justice or justice to nature brings to this picture is the valuation of non-human nature for its own sake, so that it is not only a resource, but it is viewed as valuable, diverse web of life that we are not harvesting or utilizing, but collaborating with. And this means taking into account ecosystem health and ecological integrity related aspects better also in the small-scale fishing, where, for example, one problem globally is the lack of monitoring, so that we don't really know where the sustainability problems may lie with relation to ecosystem health, for example. The other main point I want to make today, shown by the previous arguments and highlights, is that justice to small-scale fisheries requires capacity building and development, not only economic support, but also education, research, interaction, and equal arenas of dialogical interaction and discussion between different stakeholders, so that we actually, by making the invisible actors and the invisible contributions more visible, whether it's about fisherwomen, whether it's about non-economic values, whether it's about the value of nature for its own sake, making them more visible is making the food system more just and sustainable. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. Çok ilginç bir sunum oldu. Olaylara bu yönden bakmak da çok gerçekten çığır açıcı. Bakış açımızı çok zenginleştiriyor. Şimdi değerli katılımcılar, eğer sorularınız varsa sorularınızı alacağım. Sorunuzu hangi katılımcımıza ya da sunucuya soracağınızı da belirtirseniz ona göre daha kolay ulaşabiliriz yanıtlara diye düşünüyorum. Evet, şimdi top sizlerde. Vahdet Hocam, buyurun.
My question is for the last speaker about the last slide, which is very fresh. Anyway, can you please go back to the last slide? Yes. Whatever you said on this slide is actually all are related as well as explained by the FAO in the which was also mentioned by the first speaker, Mr. Matthias, Professor Matthias mentioned about this, voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries. I'm sure you are aware about this. And my question is, if they are all clearly explained and very well known and accepted by the international interested communities, why we still are suffering to implement them or put them in practice by, let's say, member states or coastal states, developed countries as well as least developed countries? What is your opinion about this?
Thank you. Excellent and very difficult question, I have to say. But I think that there are two issues in my own research that have come up. And of course, one is the complexity and market-basedness of the current food systems, which means that it is actually very difficult to create governance methods that would guarantee desired results, even when we agree about something desirable outcomes. And I'm quite sure that this significantly reduces the willingness to do such policy changes, because it may be investment without return to try to make the practices more just. But the other thing that has not been discussed very much, at least in philosophy, is I think that, of course, the current world is very unequal, and many groups, including many of us here today, we enjoy of many benefits that are not actually fully justly deserved if we look at the global picture and the price of those benefits. And the problem is that we get those benefits from our own perspective still by, for example, doing hard work, trying to get living for our families. And so from this small individual perspective, we are actually doing things fairly in that respect. And it feels unfair to give up those benefits, and making food systems and, for example, fishery value chains more just implies that some actors need to give up their benefits. So it is objected, resisted, and it might also be perceived very unjust. And this is something we should be able to clarify and criticize plausibly.
Mr. Chair, if you accept, I have an additional question related to photo on the screen. Would be very interesting, I assure you.
Okay.
No, if there is
promise.
another question, of course, I can just give the microphone to others, however you wish.
Just ask very quickly.
Okay,
please.
this photo belongs to Gökova Bay, western south of Turkey. Was taken by my colleague Zafer Kızılkaya, who is just sitting in front of me here. And the Mr. Chair also knows very well the area. I am, as well as Zafer, Central Union of Fishery Cooperative President also is here among us. We created best practice for small-scale fisheries, best practice of co-management of small-scale fisheries in that area. Do you think to these best practices to solve all these problems and justify and convince policymakers, whoever keeping the power on their hand, would be good solution or not? I mean, what do you think about that? The best practices can work or not?
I guess this can be answered by everyone in this table. Anyone who would like to answer?
Do you have anything? Well, the short answer is that I am very positive towards this idea, but what needs to be taken into account is the contextual variation, as mentioned, so that what we think as best practice works in a particular place at a particular time, and also that best practice needs to be frequently assessed. Because I think that when we invented, for example, fossil fuel-based cars, that was the best practice to move from one place to another, and now we know that it is not.
Thank you very much. Yes, any additional question? I know everybody is hungry, but yes, Adnan Ayaz, please.
Evet, benim sorum tabii ki Haydar Bey olacak. Şimdi biz okulda çok tartışıyoruz şeylerle, yetiştirici arkadaşlarla. Sonuçta biz avcıyız. Yetiştirici arkadaşlar artık diyorlar ki sizin devriniz bitti, sıra bizde. Evet, FAO'nun da gösterdiği yetiştiriciliğin artış trendi beklenen gözüküyor. Ancak atlanılan bir şey var. Kaynaklarımızın %70'i tükenmiş durumda denizlerde. %30'luk bir durumda can çekişiyor. Şimdi yetiştirici sektörü tamamıyla özellikle denizdeki üretim balık ununa dayalı bir sektör. Ve FAO'nun bu konuyla ilgili şeyleri var mı, planları var mı? Ben bunu sormak istedim. Çünkü sonuçta hamsi artık Türkiye için söylüyorum. Hamsi hadi çaça endüstriyel tür dedik. O da tükenmek üzere. Hamsi yem yapılamayacak kadar değerli bir balık ülkemiz açısından. Yani bununla ilgili bir çözüm çalışması ya da bir planlama var mı FAO'da? Bunu sormak istedim.
Teşekkür ediyorum. Güzel bir soru. Kuşkusuz FAO'daki çalışmalar temelde ülkelerin istekleri doğrultusunda yapılıyor. Bütün bu sözünü ettiğimiz yönetim biçimleri, rehber çalışmalar, teknik çalışmalar, anlaşmalar ve benzeri dediğiniz konular, gündemde olan konular gerek FAO'nun üst düzeydeki balıkçılık komitesinde gerekse alt komitede, bugünlerde toplantısı olan 11. oturumu olan FAO Su Yöneticileri Alt Komitesi'nde kurulunda konuşulan konular. Ben kaygılarınızı anlıyorum. Aslında yıllar öncesinde bize söylenen çok daha korkunç bir görüntü vardı. Kaynakların çok kısa bir sürede balık stoklarının tükeneceği. Ama nedense örneğin biz 10 yıl önce hep derdik ki denizden üretim bir ölçüde artık düşmeye başlayacak ama 10 yıldır düşmüyor bizim kayıtlarımıza göre. Doktor Kaiser haklı, belki bize gelen verilere dayalı olarak böyle. Bu belki de inanılmaz bir aşırı avcılığın süre geldiğini, artık herkesin kaynaklarının bittiğini ama yine de kimsenin yarıştan kopmak istemediğinin mi göstergesi bence. Aslında tükenişi belki görüyoruz ama nedense gözümüzü kapatıyoruz. Herkes, içinde dürüstlük var herkesin içinde. Bir yerde okumuştum, normalde insanların %90'ı konulan kurallara uyar ama bir defa siz bunu kırdınız mı artık o düzensizlik süre gelir türünden şeyler. Bence biraz bir şey var, bir sürüklenme var, bir panikleme var. Herkes biliyor bir olumsuzluğa doğru gidiyoruz. Çözümlerin öyle kolay olmadığı biliyoruz. Yeni sıkıntılar geliyor, iklim değişikliği gibi. Ama bu da şey anlamına gelmiyor, dünyada güzel örnekler gelmiyor, değil anlamına gelmiyor. Yönetim açısından güzel örnekler var. Bazı balık türlerinde düzelmeler bildirildi. Tüm bu iyi haberler hep iyi yönetimlerle birlikte geliyor. Eğer iyi yönetim derken kuşkusuz burada hep birlikte ilgili paydaşların ortak çalışmasına dayalı şeylerden söz ediyorum. Enseyi çok karartmayalım ama kuşkusuz çok büyük sorunlar var. Onun için zaten buradayız. Teşekkür ediyorum. Bilmiyorum yanıt verebildim mi?
Teşekkürler. I would like to give the floor to Professor Kaiser. If you mikrofonu verirsiniz.
Thank you. I just want to reply a little bit to your question because, as you know, we are in Norway. We have a lot of aquaculture, and this is, I mean, the issue that you address is that it is a global scandal that so much of our marine resources go to industrial uses where, you know, we are asking for more human consumption, right? And in Norway, as you may know, for example, for the salmon, which is a high predator, right, aquaculture, we have gone, I mean, in some sense there is progress. We have gone from roughly 90% of fish meal and fish oil in the feed to now less than 30%. The rest is coming from soya, right? Now, in some sense it's good, in another sense it's not so good because we have reduced the omega-3 and all of that. So there is a need, if we want to do more of the aquaculture, to think about the feed, right? And the problem is, I think, that science has long-term perspectives. There's a lot of innovation going on the feed. There is innovation from the algae and, you know, and from the lower trophic levels there. And there is also the use of other things like insects and all of that. And I've just come from a meeting with the industry there, and basically they are very much concerned that it will not reach the volume, you know, that we want to have. But I think this is one of the most important issues when we talk about growth in the aquaculture, that we need to go about and do something about using valuable resources to feed. And the old saying was, you know, we change cheap fish into expensive fish, right? And that we have to avoid. I also want to say that after I did a lot of studies on aquaculture systems, on small-scale aquaculture systems in Asia, we have seen, for example, in Bangladesh, that they use a lot of the local resources actually from the surrounding fields as feed, and because they can't buy the expensive feed. So there are solutions, and we need to be open for that, and we need to have this dialogue. What can we actually do locally to look for other kinds of feed, and how can we work together with the small-scale fisheries, and how can we make sure that the really nutritious and high-value resources go to human consumption and not to some industrial use. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution, Professor Kaiser. Gesche.
Yeah, maybe just to hop on to this question, so thank you very much for that one. I think we are right now in very interesting times because everything is what we have been doing for the last centuries is questioned, and we have a war, we have COVID. We see all that. I think this is in one time quite severe. At the next time, it's quite an interesting window of opportunity to revisit what we're actually doing. And I think also the role of small-scale fisheries needs to be revisited, and to look more into, okay, so what are we transforming at? We're right now in the middle of this. And for example, if we discuss food security and fisheries, in Europe is something very different than in Africa, for example. And having said that, so if we're transforming, we're still not sure to where are we transforming, so we don't have words and a vision for that. So that's why I think we all feel a little bit, how you say, unstable with our projections. And so, for example, in Europe, we see a trend from young consumers that they don't want to eat fish at all. So 40%, we had to do a large survey, said the young students up to 20 said they would not eat fish at all. So apparently our logic we're having right now, having more salmon and feeding that salmon in a sort of sustainable way, may not actually be the right way at all. And the same for, and if we would then say, okay, we want to have circularity in Europe, what does that actually mean for the third world countries? Because we have a responsibility there. They transformed their land into soils. And so obviously we need to revisit that one as well and then take over responsibility from that side. So it's a bit of a phase-in, phase-out process we're in. And that's why I'm quite happy that we have this opportunity really to bring our heads together and then maybe to form some visions, because we don't know where these visions will lead us to. And maybe just a little anecdote on the side. Remember when we got the first introduction of the mobile phones? Remember how we used to do appointments? We actually talked to each other and said, we will meet at Gazi in 3 days from now at 1 o'clock, and you would stick to that time. And now you sort of, I'm here, I'm in the traffic, I'm somewhere else. And obviously we change the way how we are interacting with each other changed massively, and we didn't expect that to happen. And probably the same will happen with the small-scale fisheries. Let's be surprised.
Çok teşekkürler. Ben burada oturumu kapatıyorum. Bu ilginç oturumu. Yemeğe çok geç kaldık. Herkese güzel günler diliyorum.